August 15, 1944, a quiet, shattered port near the mouth of the Seine, recently secured by Allied forces. Altitude, sea level. The air still smelled of cordite and salt water, a pungent metallic mix that defined the invasion's wake. Here, amidst the wreckage of a failed defensive stand, lay a curious prize. It was enormous, a pale green whale stranded far from the sea, a machine that looked like a conventional truck that had swallowed a boat hull. This was the DUKW, pronounced duck, and to the weary eyes of the German engineers who salvaged it, it looked like a crude joke. For years, the German war machine had prided itself on the sophistication and precision of its engineering. The Tiger Y tank, the Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighter, the relentless logic of the Blitzkrieg, these were built on a national ethos of complexity and excellence. Now they were tasked with assessing this captured Allied utility vehicle, a massive six-wheeled amphibious truck that seemed to defy every rule of elegant design. The core irony of the Second World War was not merely a clash of armies, but a clash of philosophies, German quality versus American quantity. While Hitler's factories struggled to produce a small number of flawless, intricate fighting machines, the Allies, driven by the raw, unfettered power of Detroit and General Motors, were pumping out tens of thousands of rugged, reliable, and frankly, disposable tools of war. The DUKW, with its simple, almost clumsy hull wrapped around a standard GMC truck chassis, was the perfect symbol of this crushing industrial disparity. Their technical team from the Luftwaffe Field Division, veterans accustomed to repairing high-performance aircraft engines, was ordered to recover and examine the captured Duck. Oberleutnant Karl Richter, a man whose respect for engineering bordered on religious reverence, approached the machine with undisguised contempt. "Look at the welds, Eric," he might have scoffed, according to post-war accounts. "They are ugly, no finesse. The Americans build like children playing with oversized toys." Richter's initial disdain was rooted in the vehicle's very appearance. The DUKW was essentially the frame of a GMC CC-KW353 deuce-and-a-half truck, enclosed in a sheet steel hull. It measured over 31 feet, 945 meters long, weighed 7 tons empty, and was powered by a standard GMC 270 cubic inch, 104 horsepower gasoline engine. On land, it could manage a decent 50 mph, 80 km/h, but in the water, it lumbered at a mere 4 mph, 10 km/h. Where was the complexity? Where was the revolutionary design? It was, by German standards, technologically mundane. Archival quote, alleged to be a German technical report. The vehicle, designation DUKW, presents itself as a bulky and frankly inelegant adaptation of a mass-produced chassis. Its thin plating offers no ballistic protection. We estimate low survivability under standard mortar fire. Initial assessment suggests poor tactical value for an army focused on rapid, deep penetration. But as they began their detailed inspection, one feature sparked an immediate grudging respect: the Central Tire Inflation System, CTIS. This revolutionary concept, standard on the DUKW, allowed the driver to adjust the pressure in the 6 massive tires from inside the cab while moving. Richter watched a mechanic effortlessly deflate the tires, transforming the machine's footprint for maximum traction on soft sand, then re-inflate them for hard road travel. The simple genius of it was undeniable, a subtle mastery of utility that German military vehicles, often bogged down in the mud of the Eastern Front, desperately lacked. The laughter that had accompanied the initial recovery began to die in the August heat. They understood the engine, the transmission, the propeller, but they failed to grasp the terrifying strategic implication. The DUKW was not built to fight. It was built to sustain the fight. It was the logistics lifeline, the final crucial link in an unbroken chain stretching from the American factories across the Atlantic and directly onto the invasion beaches. What the Luftwaffe mechanics didn't yet understand was that they were looking not at a vehicle, but at the true weapon of the Allies, an industrial capacity that obliterated the need for perfection. The story of the DUKW is a lesson in how logistics often determines victory. But how did this ugly duckling perform in the brutal theater of combat, and what strategic shockwave did its performance send through the high command? If you want to dive deeper into the hidden technical battles that won the war, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to see our next chapter. The recovered DUKW was quickly transported to a secluded testing facility, likely a former Wehrmacht repair depot, where Oberleutnant Richter and his team could tear into its guts. They were looking for flaws, for confirmation of their technical superiority. Instead, they found ruthless efficiency. The amphibious design, while seemingly simple, masked complex internal requirements. The hull was not merely welded steel. It was a carefully engineered boat shape developed by yacht designers Sparkman and Stevens. It was thin, only about 1/16 to 1/8 inch, 1/6 to 3/2 millimeters of sheet steel, sacrificing armor for the paramount necessity of buoyancy and payload capacity. The thin hull was a calculated risk, mitigated by a high-capacity bilge pump system capable of dealing with significant water ingress, a critical backup against small arms fire or hull breaches. Richter's team focused their attention on the heart of the machine, the drive train. They were intimately familiar with the complex gearboxes and fragile final drives of their own specialized vehicles, many of which required extensive maintenance after minimal use. The DUKW, however, utilized a robust, almost agricultural six-wheel drive system, with power routed from the main transmission to a transfer case and from there to both the wheels and the single rear-mounted propeller. The simplicity was staggering. The key to the DUKW's operational success was its ability to bridge the dangerous gap between supply ships and the shore. In major landings like Sicily, Operation Husky, and later Normandy, Operation Overlord, landing craft could only move supplies to the water's edge, creating a chaotic bottleneck, the infamous beach supply dump. The DUKW eliminated this problem entirely. It could be loaded directly from the deck of a Liberty ship, motor through the surf, transition seamlessly to land, and drive miles inland to the frontline units. This capability was not possible with German engineering. The closest equivalent the Wehrmacht had was the Schwimmwagen, a beautiful small four-wheel drive amphibious car, but the Schwimmwagen carried a maximum of 4 soldiers, not 2. 3 metric tons, 5,000 lbs of cargo, or 24 fully equipped troops, or a towed 105-meter howitzer. The comparison was apples and oranges, one a tactical scout, the other a strategic logistical monster. Archival quote, Allied Perspective, Sergeant Major Frank G. Williams, U.S. Army Logistics. Before the Duck, the beach was a wall. After the Duck, the beach was just a damp road. We could bring in everything, from ammunition to blood plasma, and drive right past the choked-up landing zones. It saved D-Day, plain and simple. We called them 6x6s in a bathtub, and they just worked. The mechanics noted the front-mounted winch, which, while seemingly a secondary feature, offered immense utility for self-recovery or hauling damaged vehicles off a congested beach, a practical nod to battlefield realities that the German designers often overlooked in pursuit of performance. The initial laughter had been replaced by a silence of contemplation. Oberleutnant Richter had started his analysis viewing the DUKW as a reflection of American technical crudeness. Now he began to see it as a reflection of American pragmatism. The vehicle was not designed to be admired, but to be expendable and effective. It was discovered that the DUKW's technical manual was not a complex, multi-volume treatise typical of German vehicles. Instead, it was a concise, clearly illustrated guide intended for a driver who was a soldier first, mechanic second. Everything, from the accessible engine bay to the standardized GMC parts, screamed of ease of maintenance and rapid repair. This was a machine built for a war of attrition, not a war of decisive surgical strikes. Richter felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool metal of the captured vehicle. He realized that the enemy was not merely stronger, they were faster and more resilient. A disabled German vehicle often meant a total loss. A damaged DUKW was simply pulled out, stripped of parts, and its functionality replaced immediately by the next unit rolling off the assembly line. This realization brings the horrifying numbers into focus. While Germany struggled to produce approximately 49,000 half-tracks across the entire war, the US produced over 21,000 DUKWs in just 3 years, 1942-1945, alongside hundreds of thousands of standard 2.5-ton trucks. The scale was overwhelming. The DUKW was the spearhead of a supply tsunami. The meticulous German engineers had to confront the terrifying reality. They might be building a better lock, but the Americans were building an exponentially greater number of keys. The German mechanics, now understanding the what of the DUKW, began to investigate the how this improbable vehicle had altered the face of warfare. Their intelligence reports, previously dismissed as exaggerated Allied propaganda, now detailed the DUKW's baptism of fire in the Mediterranean. The DUKW was born of an urgent need, initially dismissed by the US Army itself. It was the product of a collaborative effort between the yacht builders Sparkman and Stevens and the engineers at General Motors. Initial prototypes were met with skepticism, yet like many vital weapons of the war, its success was proven under the brutal pressure of combat necessity. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, July 1943, was the turning point. The initial storm-lashed landings were a nightmare. Traditional landing craft were overwhelmed, swamped, and their cargo, critical ammunition and medical supplies, lost to the waves. The Italian defenders, well entrenched, prepared for the inevitable logistical collapse on the beaches. But then the DUKWs appeared. They emerged from the rough, choppy seas, unfazed by the surf that sank other vessels. They navigated the mine-laden approaches, kept afloat by their own air pressure and high-capacity pumps, and drove straight past the shattered high tide line, delivering their vital cargo to the troops up to a mile inland. Imagine the perspective of a defending Wehrmacht soldier, perhaps a gunner on the Sicilian coast. They were trained to see the enemy as an invading force that must land, organize, and then advance. They expected the choke point, the vulnerable moment of transfer. Archival quote, Axis perspective, Corporal Heinz L., 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, Sicily. We saw the landing craft, the barges, and we knew we could break them. But then, these huge, ugly boats, they just didn't stop. They drove out of the water like giant metallic insects. They brought the artillery right into the dunes. It wasn't a landing. It was an unbroken bridge of steel and rubber from their ships to our front line. It broke our morale before the fighting even began. The DUKW's impact was immediate and strategic. Allied commanders reported that the DUKWs altered the whole problem of beach landings, turning precarious beachheads into functioning supply hubs almost instantaneously. In a single stroke, the Americans had bypassed the need to capture a deep-water port to sustain an offensive. A crucial German defensive calculation shattered. Richter's team at the testing facility had finished the engine teardown. They confirmed the low-compression, robust nature of the standard GMC 270 engine, a marvel of reliability, designed to run on the lowest octane fuel available and be repaired by any common civilian mechanic. It was a philosophy of durability over peak performance. The German equivalent engine would have offered more horsepower, but at the cost of crippling complexity and a dependence on high-quality, scarce fuel. They even examined the simplified propeller assembly and rudder mechanism, noting the relative vulnerability of the drive shaft, yet conceding that its function, moving the cargo from the ship to the dune line, was flawlessly executed. The vehicle, they concluded, was an ingenious tool, a piece of industrial art whose beauty lay only in its efficiency. The mystery was solved. The DUKW was not a masterpiece of engineering, but a masterpiece of industrial logistics. Its ability to operate in force 6C conditions and then transition to soft beach sand made it an unparalleled instrument of war. The irony for Richter was bitter. Germany had pioneered the concept of blitzkrieg, a lightning war of speed and maneuver. The Americans had responded with the DUKW, a lumbering six-wheeled beast that turned a war of speed into a devastating war of sustained momentum. The final, crushing intelligence that reached Richter's lab confirmed the strategic impact of the ugly green truck. It was not enough to defeat the enemy on the coast. The DUKW was now the key to unlocking the final crucial barriers into the German heartland, the great rivers. The Wehrmacht had always counted on its rivers, the Ruhr, the Moselle, and most crucially the Rhine, as naturally defended lines. They had demolished every bridge in their retreat, creating a seemingly impassable chasm between the advancing Allies and the German industrial base. This was the ultimate strategic defensive maneuver. The DUKW was about to render this strategy obsolete. In March 1945, during the final push across the Rhine, the Allied plan centered on massive, coordinated crossings. Operation Plunder and Operation Varsity required moving hundreds of thousands of troops and thousands of tons of supplies across one of Europe's largest, fastest-flowing rivers. The American and British forces utilized their immense engineering corps, building pontoon bridges at a miraculous pace. But until those bridges were stable, the DUKWs served as the unstoppable ferry fleet. They plunged into the icy, fast-moving waters of the Rhine, a far cry from the choppy open seas of the Mediterranean. Archival quote, Allied perspective, Lieutenant Edward Easy Jones, U.S. Army Engineers, Rhine crossing. The Germans were shelling us, and the current was like a mill race, but the ducks kept going. They were carrying the bridging sections, the cable, the fuel, and the wounded coming back. We lost a few to artillery, but the sheer number they threw into that river, it was a constant moving chain of supply. It wasn't a river crossing, it was a logistics flood. The DUKW's performance on the Rhine highlighted its essential role as a logistics platform, not merely a truck. It ferried vital ammunition directly to the far bank, saving hours of hazardous unloading and reloading. It transported the engineers' heavy equipment, helping construct the very pontoon bridges it would soon be crossing. Richter and his team meticulously reviewed the battle reports and aerial reconnaissance photos. They saw the bridges going up, but they also saw the continuous amphibious shuttle service operating 24 hours a day. The Germans had designed their defense to be unbreakable by bridge. The DUKW had shown it could be broken by a boat truck. The captured DUKW was a cold, hard piece of truth. Its presence in the Luftwaffe lab was a tangible admission of Allied operational superiority. Richter, his face grim, is said to have dictated the final summary of his findings. It was no longer a technical assessment, but a strategic eulogy for the German war effort. Archival quote, fictionalized German internal monologue based on reports. This vehicle is not refined, it is not fast, it is not armored, but it is ubiquitous. It is an extension of the American factory. We build 100 brilliant machines. They build 20,000 merely competent ones, and they can bring every single one of those machines, along with the fuel and the bullets, from the ship to the foxhole without stopping. We have been defeated not by superior tactics, but by superior assembly lines. The terror was now entirely psychological. The enemy's ability to mass-produce reliable, multifunctional equipment had nullified Germany's genius for specialized design. The DUKW was the ultimate symbol of a war that had transitioned from a duel of quality to a grind of overwhelming industrial power. The war ended, but the stark lessons learned in the workshops of the Luftwaffe by men like Oberleutnant Richter were not forgotten. The technical assessment of the DUKW, initially intended to expose Allied flaws, instead became a chilling footnote in the history of the Wehrmacht, a blueprint for why they had lost the logistics war. The ugly duckling, once met with condescending laughter, had matured into a definitive six-wheeled symbol of Allied victory, a testament to the irresistible power of pragmatic, mass-produced utility. When the guns fell silent, the DUKW was rapidly retired from frontline U.S. military service in the 1950s. Yet its physical absence belied its permanent influence. Its primary legacy, the foundational philosophy of amphibious logistics and the unbroken ship-to-shore-to-inland supply chain, was permanently etched into global military doctrine. The idea of bypassing vulnerable ports, conceived by a simple boat truck, became the standard for all future combined operations. The most enduring, quiet triumph of the DUKW was its technological innovation. Its central tire inflation system, CTIS, which Richter's team had so grudgingly admired, was revolutionary. Before the DUKW, adjusting tire pressure meant stopping, dismounting, and hours of arduous handwork, a death sentence on a contested beach. The ability to vary the tire footprint from within the cab, going from high pressure for paved roads to low pressure for soft sand, ensured the DUKW could cross any terrain. This feature was so effective and critical to mobility that it became a standard feature on virtually all subsequent modern military transport and utility vehicles worldwide, from the U.S. Army's HMMMWV to the German Army's own heavy trucks. A piece of GMC utility, not Porsche precision, defined the future of armored mobility. The scale of its deployment was staggering. More than 21,000 DUKWs were produced in a rush of wartime necessity. Beyond the American and British forces, who received around 2,000, the DUKW was shipped in significant numbers to the Soviet Union via the Lend-Lease Act. On the vast waterlogged front of the East, where the mud of the Rasputitsa swallowed German motorized columns whole, the reliable DUKW played an equally vital and often unheralded role, ferrying men and equipment across countless frozen and thawed rivers. It proved that in the harshest environments, simplicity equals survival. The true impact of the DUKW can be measured in lives saved and disasters averted. Consider the savage storm that struck the Normandy beaches just days after D-Day. The massive artificial harbours, the mulberries, were battered, and supply operations ground to a halt. Traditional landing craft were rendered useless, yet the DUKWs defied the high winds and heavy seas. Over 200 DUKWs were deployed solely for humanitarian and salvage missions, successfully evacuating thousands of wounded soldiers from the exposed beachheads and salvaging immense quantities of vital equipment that would have otherwise been lost to the swirling tides. This single storm operation demonstrated the machine's crucial value not just in assault, but in sustained recovery and essential aid. The vehicle's performance was so robust, so utterly essential to maintaining the Allied foothold, that General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself later declared the DUKW one of the 5 most critical pieces of equipment that guaranteed Allied victory in Europe, placing it alongside legendary weaponry like the C-47 transport plane and the Jeep. This was the definitive military endorsement of an engineering philosophy: utility trumps complexity. The DUKW was never merely a vehicle, it was an industrial statement. It proved that in the high-stakes chess game of total war, logistics and industrial scale are often the ultimate checkmate. The German dedication to intricate, over-engineered equipment, from the fragile Panther tank transmissions to the high-maintenance V-2 rockets, ultimately cost them vast resources and precious time they did not have. Their commitment to the pursuit of the technically perfect allowed the Americans to win with the functionally sufficient. The American dedication to a simple, standardized tool that could be produced in the thousands and repaired by anyone proved unstoppable. The DUKW's hull was thin, its top speed was modest, and its profile was undeniably ungainly. But by carrying the lifeblood of war, the tons of aviation fuel, the crates of artillery ammunition, and the rations of food, from the safety of the distant mothership to the chaos of the front line, it created the unbroken supply chain that strangled the German war machine into submission. Today, the DUKW story comes full circle. Many of these same vehicles, the very ones that bridged the Rhine and conquered the beaches of Normandy, still serve as civilian duck tours, carrying tourists through the harbours and streets of cities across the world. They are a living, working monument to an uncomfortable truth the German High Command was forced to swallow. The war would be won not by the best machine, but by the most resilient and most numerous. The DUKW was the physical manifestation of Allied manufacturing might, the engine of that resilience, and ultimately, the improbable conqueror. The stories of the Second World War are filled with tales of brilliant, often overlooked technology that changed the course of history. If you found this journey into the strategic and technical world of the DUKW compelling, please give this video a like, share it with fellow history enthusiasts, and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing you these deep-dive historical narratives. Let us know in the comments below, what other piece of ugly but effective technology do you think defined the outcome of World War II?